Stress, damage, and difficulty are a requirement for you to be a better human. Without them, you will stay stagnant and live a terrible life. Let's unpack that. A key concept in understanding what I'm going to talk about with these three is something called anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is a way to describe systems or biological organisms that references when they get put under stress or have damage happen or are in difficult situations. What they do is rather than bounce back to where they were before, which would be resilience, they actually get better than they previously were. A very easy example of this to understand is something like muscles. The only way to grow a muscle is to damage it and have the body respond to that by healing and healing better. This is kind of the natural state that human beings are. They are by design anti-fragile. Now, the growth doesn't come from the damage. The growth comes from the recovery of the damage. So damage has to happen in order for recovery to be necessary, but our superpower is in that recovery. And that's a concept that we have to understand when it comes to all three of these things, both stress, damage, and difficulty being the things that actually move us forward in life. We as humans are anti-fragile. So let's talk about stress first. Stress has two different kinds of forms, I would say. You've got maladaptive stress, which is stress that you do not recover from and just slowly wears away on you. And we have adaptive stress. And adaptive stress is stress that gets put on you and you then get to step back and relax and figure it out and then learn from it or grow from it, whatever means. And then when you come back, the next time that same stressor happens, you have a way of coping with it and you're better than you previously were because of that rest period. Now, this can come in the forms of different kinds of work. Say you've got a big task that you're needing to accomplish and you've never done it before. It's extremely stressful. But when you sit and unpack the task and you dwell in that and then you take some rest from it and you come back and you work hard on it and you come back and you work hard on it again and you succeed in that task, the next time you're faced with a similar task, you will have so many more skills in order to overcome that task. So that initial stress of not knowing how to do it or not knowing what to do was something that improved you in the long run. You became better because of that stress. Now, maladaptive stress is stress that we don't realize that we're under often. So things that are constantly ticking away in our brains that we never fully address. Think about things like trauma, something that happened to you a long time ago that maybe you never actually unpacked, or a person that you've never confronted who has this continued back and forth with you that puts you into a deeper and deeper hole. If you never confront those things, if you never give yourself the space to unpack that, whether it be through therapy and conversation or through action or through a confrontation, you will never recover from that. And that will be maladaptive stress. It will be stress that continues to linger and break you down longer and longer and longer. So when it comes to stress, our goal is to have adaptive stress. Our goal is to look at the stressors that we have, what can we remove, and what are ones that we can step back and either rest or figure out a way to overcome, so that way we learn from this and we grow from this and we become more anti-fragile in the form of stress. So stress is good if we can recover from it or if we can learn from it. So let's talk about damage now. Damage is inevitable. I think for me, how I'm defining damage or how I'm describing damage is something that's far more acute. When you look at stress, stress is something that kind of like builds up and it sits on you and you carry it and you move through it. Damage is something that is more striking and more acute. It's like a car accident. Boom, you get into a car accident. Or somebody says something to you that's really aggressive and you're like, ow, and that hurt in that moment. I'm going to refer to those things as damage because they take you from a place of like, I was good, bam, all of a sudden I'm not. It's the same thing as when you hurt yourself, skiing or something along those lines. And on a micro level, that's what happens when you train. We talked about the muscles earlier in growing. That's damage. By design, you're damaging the musculature so it gets stronger. Now, the way that we improve from damage is, again, rest and recovery. We need to recognize what damaged us, and we need to go, why did that damage us? If it's psychological or if it's physiological or whatever it might be. And then we need to actively try to not let that happen by either avoiding those scenarios, confronting that thing again, or giving ourselves time to rest and heal and then become stronger around that. So damage can be great because when damage hits us, we are very quickly confronted with something that is not working. And we have to go, I cannot necessarily change what the damage is happening at me, but I can change my response to it. And I can position myself so that this either doesn't happen again, or I'm going to be stronger because of it. And when it happens again, I will have new tools or a new level of strength to deal with this, whether that be physiologically or psychologically. So damage, because it's so acute, because it happens so aggressively, it helps us grow, it helps us be better. That's damage. And that's why it's necessary for our continued growth. And lastly, let's talk about difficulty. Difficulty is something that I think why I added it here instead of just keeping it the same as the other two, because you could argue stress is difficult. You could also argue that damage is difficult, but difficulty is something that we can choose. Difficulty, when chosen, is actually extremely beneficial for us. A lot of those other two things like stress and damage, I believe that those often happen to us, and we have to choose how we respond and what we do. In order to become better at responding to both stress and damage, we actually need to do difficult things intentionally. So pursuing difficulty, this kind of goes into the realm of that, like the Goggins world or any of these like self-help kind of rah-rah, embrace the pain sort of stuff. The choice of saying, hey, this is hard, but I'm going to do it anyway, or I'm going to seek something difficult and do that rather than constantly seeking pleasure, is kind of the only way that we continue to grow. By intentionally pursuing difficulty, we put the power in our own hands and allow ourselves to get better. And in whatever realm that we're talking about, whether it's communication and relationship difficulty, or whether it's physiological difficulty in the form of training and working out, if something is easy, then by design, it's likely not going to make us grow. It's going to be something that sits and is easy to do and is a lot like masturbation. It's super fun, but at the same time, there's no progress being made there. What we want to do is we want to pursue difficult things intentionally, and difficult things that have an outcome where we're better on the other end of that. I mean, you could say hitting yourself in the, finger with a hammer would be difficult, but it's like, no, that's stupid. But things that are difficult are like choosing to eat well. That's difficult. Like simple to eat well, but not easy. So difficult, choosing to eat well, figuring out ways to navigate social situations where you're going to have to make a different choice, whatever it might be. Training that can be easier or harder. Walking on a treadmill for some is extremely difficult. Once that becomes easy though, you got to pursue more difficulty. Training is a really good example of you want to be starting in a place that's doable and then constantly pushing the difficulty so that your body continues to adapt and be better. Relationships. You don't want a super easy relationship. You want parts of it to be easy, but then other parts of it, you need to navigate those pieces. And the point of that is to round off the sharp edges of your own personality and being. If you just stick with your one thing and then they just mold to you, you're not changing. You're not growing. You're not improving. But I'm already great. You could be better. The idea of difficulty allows you to not be as challenged by the things like stress and damage. If you pursue difficulty intentionally, damage and stress are less impactful on you, and it's much easier to cope with both of them. So difficulty, damage, and stress are absolutely essential to us growing as human beings, and they're extremely beneficial to you. I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense, because we don't want to necessarily run from these things. We don't want to necessarily run at these things, but don't worry, they're there for a reason. They're extremely beneficial.